right. My name is Barry Casey. I'm the Interim Director of Faculty Development Center, just one floor up there. And this is Rubrics 101. I'm sure that you come with all different kinds of understanding of rubrics and knowledge and experience with them. And I'm going to assume that we're all beginners here, and we'll get to some advanced stuff too. So the first thing I want to do is introduce Ann Spence. Come on up, Ann.
Oh, that's right. I got to come up. Sorry.
And she describes herself as a helicopterologist.
That's right.
And in her day job, she works in mechanical engineering. She's a professor there. And I watched her last week up here in the atrium. She was working with her students. They were doing some things with Lego robots and things like that. She had a clipboard. She looked very official. She was working with a rubric, and I thought, this is good. This is good timing. So I've asked Ann to come and to talk about her use of the rubric in her project that she's in the midst of. So if you look inside your packet, and if you don't have one, make sure you get one back there. It's the first one. It's on the top. And Ann is going to walk us through this package that she uses for that particular project and describe how she uses it. But first I wanted to ask her, why do you use rubrics and how do they benefit you?
I've been using rubrics probably since I started teaching the design courses. That's where I really felt like I needed some assistance in helping me to really, first of all, identify the key elements that I thought the students needed to show in their design project, in their presentation, in a report. So it really helped me to hone in on the outcomes that I wanted them to have at the end of each of these items. And frankly, it helps the students a lot. You know, you always get that comment, well, what should I do? You know, what are you expecting? Then I can just say, go to the rubric. The rubric, you know, based on the number of point value for each item, that means you should spend more on this item and less time on this item. So it helps me and it helps the students to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead and walk us through this.
Okay.
Rubric.
All right, great. So this first item in the rubric here is the Design Project Presentation Assessment rubric. And I kind of adapted this from something that was produced by Connie Schroeder at Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And this is what I use when my students in my freshman engineering design course are presenting their final design projects. So they have about 7 minutes. They have to be quick, they have to be concise, and they have to convey a lot of information to me. So it gives you a range of values here. It tells you if we're looking, for example, at the design problem and boundaries, they have to talk about what the problem was and what were their constraints and boundaries. And it goes from unacceptable to exceptional. And I'm able to kind of identify based on what they're talking about which of those categories that's going to fit in. So you'll notice their point values for that. Then if you notice down along the left-hand side where we have topics, the topics are also weighted because there are some topics that were much more important to me than others. So I made sure that I gave them some weightings. So it's simply a matter of doing the math, adding it all up, and then I have a total value for how they did on the presentation. So this also, I also post this almost the very beginning of the semester so students know exactly what the expectations are from the get-go. And they don't have to keep coming back to me and say, well, what is this? Well, what is that? And I make sure I cover these items throughout the class. You know, so these are outcomes that are being covered in a lecture, that may be a reading assignment, something like that. So this is the one I use with my freshman engineering design students. And I think I'm going to skip the next one for now because this is the one I use in my sophomore engineering design class. And I'm going to go to that next item, which is the design report evaluation. So this, again, is for the freshman engineering design course. It identifies certain things that I expect to see in the report. The executive summary is something that I think is important. It gets 8 points, and it's a one-page document, you know, 8 of the 100, because I remind them that when they're working as engineers, they're going to have to be able to give a one-pager to their vice president or something like that that's going to completely explain their project, is going to be succinct, because the bottom line is the VP is not going to read the whole report. So give me the highlights, and so they put that in there. And then there's some, you know, an introduction in here. The analysis and discussion section is the largest section with the most point value, but that's what they've been working on the whole semester. Yes?
Do they believe you?
They do because I can give them experience, because I worked as an engineer, and I say, I remember one day going into my president, or my VP for engineering, and he's saying something to me, and I was able to give this to them. So I think they believe a little bit. They're still freshmen. They don't believe a lot of what you tell them until the grade comes out, right? So yeah, that's a good question. We try to reinforce it along the way. In fact, in one of our courses, we are doing a 2-minute elevator speech is the requirement in that class. They have to be able to get up and do well, actually it's not 2 minutes, 1 minute elevator speech, because most of them don't go that high. So there's a lot of items listed in here that I've included that are important to the project. And then the final thing that's in the packet here is the peer evaluation form. And since the students have to work on teams throughout this project, I actually create the teams myself in freshman engineering design. Some of my courses I let them choose, but in this class I create the courses. They have to fill out a team application where they talk about their skills that they'll bring, their writing skills, their 3D visualization skills, any other kind of mechanical skills they might have. And I try to pair up teams that are multidisciplinary. So a computer engineer with a mechanical engineer with a chemical engineer, maybe an undecided engineer. So I create those teams and they're forced to work in them. Now what I do then twice in the semester is I ask them to do a peer evaluation of everyone on their team, including themselves. They have to evaluate themselves. And this helps me to see where I see dysfunctionality going on in teams, where we may need to do some intervention to get teams functioning a little bit better. So this is kind of the wake-up call at the beginning of this, in the middle of the semester, and then they do it again at the end of the semester. So hopefully those people have joined and come on board as far as teams go. And then they're asked to rate that, again, I've identified the items here that are important to function on good teams. Are you coming to the meetings? Are you being responsive? Are you doing your part? Do you complete your work as assigned? And so they rate each other on that, and then I total it up. And this is actually part of their grade at the end of the semester, is this peer review. The other item I have in there is the rubric for 204, and that's my sophomore engineering design class, and that's going to be they're back there in that red folder. No worries. And so these are going to be all mechanical engineering students that are in here. This is a class for majors. And we go a little bit more in depth into the engineering design process. They, again, produce a product. And this rubric also looks at similar items that we consider to be important when we're talking about outcomes, how they're making their presentations. And then finally, it gives you a page back here then to comment specifically on items that were in the presentation. So, of course, feedback is really important to these students. We don't want them, it's not fair to just evaluate them and say, okay, here, you got this grade. You need to give them some kind of feedback so that they can make changes in their presentations in the future. So that's kind of it for rubrics. Anybody have questions? Yes?
For the peer evaluation form, I know you said that at mid-semester you use that
Right.
as the need to intervene. Do you factor this into their grades at
Yes.
all? How do you?
I give it, what I use it for is a multiplier on their design project grade. So probably 60% of their grade is individual work, homeworks, exams, things like that. About 40% of their grade is their design project work, which includes the report, building the product and testing it, doing the presentation. So a team will get a grade. And then what I do is I use this as a multiplier. Like if you got really great scores from everyone, you got all of the credit for that design project grade. If you were obviously a slacker, then you only got a certain percentage of that grade. So like if you got a 40, if you got all 40 points, the top student in the team would get all 40 points for the design project. If you were someone who came in and instead of getting a 50 here, because this adds up to 50 for a perfect score, if you got a 30, which is pretty low, most of them are rating themselves, they're getting ratings above 40, unless someone is just really, really slacking off. And so then I just take that as a percentage of the 50. Like if they got an average of 25, then I give them 50% of the score points. And they know that up front. I tell them that's going to happen. Yes?
What would keep all the team members from evaluating everyone else very highly?
That does happen. They all get together and they say, let's give each other all 50s. But the bottom line is no one else sees these but me. And I don't post them. You know, I post them in the middle of the semester, but I don't post the last ones until they find out what their grade is at the end. But what happens is if there is a slacker on the team, people identify that person. They're not willing to give everyone 50s. And in teams where they're all willing to give everyone 50s, I figure, well, somehow they have, as a team, worked together to figure this out. And if they're all willing to do that, then they're all willing to do that.
You know, another way I've seen that handled is that you tell them you're gonna give them a grade too.
Yes, yes.
And then they get the lower of the two plus a penalty if yours is lower than theirs.
Oh, I like that.
Say that again?
And would also give them a peer evaluation individually. And then the ones that they come up with are compared to hers, and whichever one is lower, the student gets. Whichever one is
Higher.
Whichever one is lower, the student gets, plus there's a penalty if theirs is higher than Ann's.
Right. So if the students evaluate each other as higher than I evaluate them, then there's a penalty. Is that
You
what
get
you're
the
saying?
last word.
I get the last word.
It does put more of a burden on you to
It
now
does.
also have to evaluate
And that's why I
individuals
haven't
as
done
opposed to
that,
just
is
teams.
because I have about 100 students in the
Yeah.
class. And it's really difficult for me. And a lot of times they're meeting outside of class. All I can see is
The
if
work
they're
product.
spending time in my lab doing work, if they're coming to ask me questions, if I'm getting emails from them, you know. And that's certainly, when I ultimately decide my grades, I do use that kind of as a weather vane. You know, if I've seen this student a lot, if they've been engaged, if they're asking questions, if they're a borderline student, they're going to get the higher grade. So other questions? Good, wonderful.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Ann is busting off to NBC.
Is there any feature of any of your courses that can't be reduced to a rubric? I mean, is there something that is
Can't be reduced to a rubric.
irreducible?
Wow.
Or you've got rubrics for every element of grading for every course? Except for, exams, let's say.
Yeah, I do, because, you know, for each exam question, I make up a rubric for what components get certain grades, because, you know, when you're grading 100, you know, and it's not multiple guess, then you've got to have some kind of, so I use it, gosh, I can't think of anything I don't use it for. So I use them a lot. And it's easy, you know, I like numbers, they're quantifiable, it's easy to put a number on something and say, yeah, well, you did this. And then it's also when the student comes to complain and say, I didn't get as many points as so-and-so next to me, I could say, well, here's the rubric, see, you missed this, this, and this, and that's why you got that, and that person got that. So it helps out.
When you have the exceptional category, is that exceptional relative to the class, or is that?
Wow, that's a good question. I typically do it as exceptional to me, not based on the class. I have done it, I guess, before where I've rated it's hard to do that because I have 5 different sections that I have to evaluate, and it's hard to kind of keep them straight, even within the same section. You know, presentation number 1 versus presentation number 7. I guess I have an ideal in my mind, I would say, that meets that.
So do you end up with a bell curve of grades with the rubrics, or do they?
Good question. I would say I probably do. Yeah, within a section, unless, sometimes I have an honor section of a course, so that makes it a little bit more challenging. And then I also have a Y section of some of my courses. And for those of you who don't know, that's the Introduction to an Honors University. So there's additional, it's kind of for the kids that we think may struggle a bit in their transition to college. So they get an extra 1-hour lecture each week that's usually conducted by one of our advisors from the College of Engineering. And they learn about things like study skills. They learn about, you know, what, if you think you want to be an engineer, here are some of the kinds of things engineers do. Where can you go for help on campus? So sometimes those struggle a little bit more as a freshman in the very first semester, although my Y section this semester was better than all the others. So I don't know if it just happened to be all the other sections were closed, the Y was still open, and these guys enrolled in it, so I don't really know what happened there. But Yeah, I think it ends up as a welcome. Yes?
I just wanted to say, I was looking at the peer evaluation form.
Mhm.
I actually teach LRC 101, which is academic life learning skills
Yes,
for
yeah, right.
Learning Resource Department. And this is excellent because I have students that are freshmen and they're transfers, in my class. So this in regards to whether it's gender, culture, age,
Right.
this really fits the rubric of, they get a teamwork project for the end of the semester. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna use this in the
Good,
fall.
excellent.
Because it really is, it really
It
fits
quantifies it. It makes it very easy for them to say, okay, they don't come to meetings, they don't respond to emails. And then you don't have this nebulous, students say, well, they're not participating. Well, what does that mean? So it works out well for us. Yes?
You may have mentioned it, but do you have TAs that assist with grading?
Yes, in my freshman engineering design class, each of the sections is led by a teaching fellow. They're actually undergraduates who have had me in probably 2 years ago, who I've chosen specifically because of their ability to communicate, their understanding of students, their mentoring ability. Sometimes they have interesting background stories on having struggled, and so they work with the students one-on-one as well.
But do they do any of the grading?
They grade the homeworks, and they grade the discussion quizzes. And also, when we do presentations, they're sitting there right beside me filling out a form as well.
A rubric?
A rubric, yes, they're filling out a rubric as well.
That's one of my biggest challenges. I have a couple of classes that are very large, and so a lot of the grading my TAs do, but they're graduate students, so it's just, I was wondering if you had any advice for how to make sure that the TAs are fairly consistent.
I meet with mine every week, and we talk about the homework and what the expectations are on the homework, and I expect them to come up with a joint grading rubric on how they're gonna grade the homeworks and what kind of points they're gonna give. I guess it may be easier in engineering because everything's kind of quantifiable. It may be more of a challenge in your field where you have to think of wording or something, and maybe you choose words. If this word appears in here, or this specific concept appears in here, then that's gonna be worth a certain number of points. So I do have them get together and figure out what they're gonna do.
For my labs, I have maybe 6 to 10 graduate teaching assistants for the labs. And I rotate responsibility for them to outline a partial credit rubric for pre-laboratory questions and post-laboratory questions. And so each week, it's a different student that has that assignment, and then they just say, if the answer is missing this feature, you lose 1 point, and if it's missing this feature, you lose 2 points. And then also the way it's supposed to work is all the TAs are literally grading from the same page, so same partial credit.
And it's a good project for the class to build a rubric too, for the following year's class. When you come to the end, that works as well. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
See you next, I can run to my next meeting.
All right, I'm going to show a quick presentation here. You know that you need to use rubrics if your hand is really cramped from writing comments. It's 3 a.m. and you're still grading. You've probably been there, done that. Students aren't getting the assignment requirements. They keep asking over and over again, and every time you say it, it seems to come out differently. You wonder if your grading scales are realistic. There's plenty more reasons for using rubrics, and Anne gave you some good ones here too. So just keep some of these things in mind as you go through. There's really 2 basic, we talk about the benefits. These are the ones that matter the most to me. It clarifies values and expectations. Those are your values, your expectations. That goes back to the assignments and what's required there too. But really it helps to promote critical thinking also, because you want to get them beyond just the basics and start to really think about what they're doing and think about how they're learning and begin to make connections between this class and other classes they've had and so forth. It provides detailed student feedback, and that's invaluable, both when they're working on the assignment, when they get it back, and it avoids grade grubbing too. And it helps with timely feedback. I always had a problem getting the papers back in a timely fashion until I switched over to rubrics, and it really made a difference. And it's not that you're not paying attention to the work, it's that the work itself is made easier and clearer for both you and the students, so that the process of grading itself doesn't take up all the time. You know, you can spend more time on discussing, on activities. They can spend more time on the assignment itself. So it works out pretty well, and it actually helps you to improve your teaching. The way that it does that for me is to tie my rubric. Well, my rubric flows out of my objectives. So what I want to see on that assignment and in that class can be put on a rubric and explained as clearly as I can. So what I've got then at the end of the semester is a class which, you know, ideally I began with some course objectives. Those showed up in the syllabus. I explained them sometimes several times throughout the course, particularly when we're coming to a new assignment. They show up on the rubrics for that particular assignment, and before I give the assignment, we walk through the whole rubric and explain it out. And then after they get the assignment back, and everyone's turned it in, then I can go through it again in class. If there are any questions, or if it was a particularly complex assignment, then we can discuss how it worked. And if they have suggestions at that point about the rubric itself, maybe something wasn't quite clear or it fell short in some way, then I can go back and make those changes for the next time I use it. And that's another thing. Rubrics are a work in progress. First time you use it, you think you've made it airtight, but someone will find a way to, you know, unfit the category. So just think of it as a work in progress. Yeah, John.
I would like to add to the benefits also consistency of grading.
Right.
In our part, because I do find that, you know, on Tuesday I'm grading and it's late and whatever, then on Saturday I'm grading, and I find myself a little bit more lenient somehow. It's like,
That's
well,
right.
you know, and I'm like, no, but I think I did it differently on Tuesday, so it really helps to keep one on check.
Yeah, that's really true. And after you've gone through a whole stack, you start out, you've got high hopes, and if you know, and they get dashed or they get supported, and then you sort of feel yourself on a graph, you know, that the roller coaster going up and down, grading, but that really does make a difference. Yeah, John?
I think the other thing is it really can help structure peer review
Yeah.
for the students. If you put the time in for their dialogue with you, there's no reason why they can't have the dialogue with each other once they know how it's going to be evaluated.
And especially if they're working in groups and they all have an individual rubric and a group rubric too. That reinforces the idea that we're all in this together, and that we're not only learning the subject, we're learning how to learn. There's two types of rubrics, and we'll talk a little more about these as we go through it, but there's the scoring guide, which I like to call a holistic one, and that's your highest expectations, and do they match it? Just call it the grade expectations one.
Huh.
And then 3 to 5 level rubric, which is probably more common. That's what Anne was using in that first one there. And we'll look at that a little closer. So how do you build a rubric then? Start out with a basic grid, and what we've done here is, this is a 3-level one, right across here, and down on this side. So we'll see how it comes together as we go. So we've got a grid like that. You can build this in Word, or that in the tables content. First thing to do is to put down a task description. This is the description of the assignment. And you put it across the top there so they can always refer to it. And they can't say, well, I didn't know what to do. It's right there. The next thing is the dimensions. You can call these categories also, if you like. These are the things by which you describe the assignment, the various components of an assignment. We'll see a little more about that. Things like accuracy, analysis, application, mechanics, spelling, grammar, that kind of stuff. Those are the dimensions. So you fill those things in. Then we can move to the scale levels, and this is where the 3 or 5 level idea comes about. This is the level at which you decide something is excellent or unacceptable or something like that. Lots of different ways to describe those scale levels. And depending upon how easy, you want to let them down easy, you can use different kinds of descriptors there. And at the very end, I give you some examples of different descriptors for those scale levels. But here's a good 3-level one that I've used quite a bit: excellent, competent, and needs work. Of course, what they're thinking is that means A, B, C. And probably it does. When you get down to the numbers, it does. But I think rubrics helps shift them away so much from concentration on grades and more about the quality of the work. And that ties into critical thinking and that kind of thing. So this works, the 3-level one, excellent, competent, needs work, that works for a lot of different assignments. You could add other over here too, depending on how far you want to go with that. And then the fourth thing, the last thing, is to add in the descriptions then on these different categories, descriptions which describe what is excellent, what is competent, what needs work. And you begin with the best one, of course, and then you start subtracting, if you like. When you get over here to the unacceptable, then you may even start adding things. This is what definitely should not be in here, and it is, so it needs a lot of work. This rubrics really work well then for something that would go through drafts, several drafts, or go through some sort of process. And that helps to reinforce the idea that thinking takes time, and that when you get to writing, writing is about revision, and it's a process. It's not just the end product. Rubrics can help reinforce that and support that whole idea. So finished product then looks something like that. And of course, there are all kinds of variations on these things. And we'll have a look at that now. So if you go to the, are there any questions about this bit right here? By the way, if you want a copy of the presentation, you can pick that up afterward, the slides here. Now, look at this one. It's the next one in your packet there. And these are several kinds of rubrics. I first started to work with rubrics back in the 90s because a colleague had gone to a conference and introduced them to me. And at first I just didn't get it. It seemed like so much work for so little payback. And he was just kind of gently insisting, you really should try this. So we taught a class together, and he was using a rubric, so then I had to come up with mine. And I thought, dang, this is good. I should have been doing this all along. So I've been using them ever since, and by the time I finished teaching, there wasn't a class I wasn't using rubrics in for every assignment. And in the senior level classes, actually getting the students to develop a rubric for a particular class project, which they could then hand off to the group that was coming in next year. So that kind of helped in their meta-reflection about thinking and so forth. The first one here is one that I used in a research class, and this is the scoring guide, or I like to call it the holistic kind of approach there. It's actually kind of a combination. It's got levels, but the wording is pretty simple, and it allowed me to look at the whole thing and score it fairly quickly. And we kept this before us as we went through that whole process, so they understood what it was. When I say shows a high degree of conceptual understanding, they would say, well, what does that mean? So then we talk about that before they launched the assignment and so forth. So that's one. The next one is one that I developed just to use something in class for an in-class assignment. It can be used very quickly, and it's just EVSU. Those are the objectives that we're trying to accomplish with that assignment, and then they would hand that in. I would hand that to them at the end of the class period. The third one, the one entitled Media Ethics, this one is a little more complicated. There's a 3-level thing there. And you can see that as far as the categories or the dimensions go, I'm trying to cover as much territory as possible there. And that also allows me to write in the final grade and then to put comments at the end. With the holistic one, it almost needs comments, because in some ways it's vague enough that you need to use comments to kind of fill that out. But for most of the time that you'll be using rubrics, you don't have to be writing comments. That's what saves you so much time. Of course, that means that the rubric descriptions get more complicated and more detailed as you go. And again, people always find a way to sort of slip between the categories. Another way you can do it is you can actually circle parts of the rubric which they did well or they did not do well. Or if you have a list, like my first one there, you could check off which ones they did well or which ones they did not, because it might be that they are in several different levels for that effort. So maybe they showed a high degree of conceptual understanding, but down here, they followed the APA style with 3 or more errors. So you can kind of go through the whole list and check off things. Then the challenge is, which grade do they get? Well, you sort of kind of figure that one out, But the point here is that you're explaining the process of thinking and doing and acting, and how you, as a teacher, think about that work, think about the objectives. What is it that you want to see happen in their approach and so forth. So it can make for some good discussions, not just arguments, but real discussions about the quality of the work. Any questions before we go on to the next page? Okay, the green sheet is 2 examples from folks here at UMBC, and I see Suzanne laughing. Hers is the first one, and I must say this is a very elegant design. She sent it to me, and when I saw it, I thought, it should be framed. It's perfect. It communicates right away exactly what you need to know. And I like the layout too. Nice design there. Suzanne, anything you want to say about that?
Well, just what you said, it's a work in progress. I did this after I sort of bumbled my way through a class and got the feedback from my students as well. We didn't quite know what we were supposed to do, because I didn't know. It was a new project I was trying out. So I went back and did this, and as you said, now it's never finished. Now I would put in the peer evaluation, the
Yes.
students looking at the end product digital stories and then evaluating that
Yeah.
as well. So to get their input, not just, the teacher being God.
Right, right.
What's the feedback you've gotten from students on this?
On this one, like I said, this is the one I did afterwards. Before it
Oh.
was more of a bundled holistic approach that left them in the dark.
So
Somehow
are you using this one now, or?
It was a topics class, so I'm not teaching this
Okay.
right now, but I would if I ever did a digital story again.
You can certainly adapt it to other classes. And it's nice because she's got room to make comments as well.
Yeah, I find that important, that you have a place for personal,
Yeah. You can do it right there at the side, or you can do it at the end, just before the final grade. A lot of different ways to do that. Then on the other side is one from Marilyn Goldberg. And this one emphasizes writing. It's a writing assignment, apparently. But again, it's quite clear, and she breaks it down into the components. And so a student can scan through that and see exactly where they fell short or they came up to the mark. And it really helps for advising, too. Yeah.
One thing that I've been doing, and we've tried to do this with the hybrid stuff, with discussion boards, sometimes it's interesting to have the students turn in the rubric with a self-grade before you even look at it. Just what do they think they got? And with the discussion board rubric, it works a little better because they have to get evidence from the discussion board that supports the grade they give themselves. I'm not sure every dimension can be covered that way with other kinds of grading rubrics, but if you sort of put the onus on them to say, here's what I think I deserve, maybe they even add a comment, it might be helpful for the faculty in terms of just seeing what do they think they got. Now, you could have the case where they all just say, I got an A. With the discussion portfolio, when we've done it, and I'm starting to see this with other faculty as well, more often than not, they're a lot harder on themselves than you would be. It's just they never get asked. They say, okay, I gotta do the assignment, but they never get asked, what do you think it's worth?
Do you find yourself influenced when you read their thing first before you look at their work?
What I find is that it helps me focus on certain things. I mean, if I sort of have a sense of the person in the class, if I have a sense that they've sort of oversold themselves, then I'm gonna look more carefully. If I have a sense that, no, they've been doing the work, they've been showing up, I'm probably gonna pay more attention to it. What your question is a valid one. You could be, influenced, but to the extent that you're trying to not just streamline grading, but embed a sort of dialogue about what you value and sort of the learning process and learning how to learn, sometimes the best way to do that is start developing that critical review yourself. Now, if they can do that with peer review, that's great. If they can do it with themselves, it's even better. But I don't know, when you go through all the work on this, if it's just sort of check mark, is that there's a lot of ways you can recycle the instrument once you have developed it. And if you just said, turn it in with your name, what you gave yourself, I'll take a look. And if you just had the caveat that I reserve the right to raise, lower, or accept your grade.
Yeah, that's right.
Based on what I see.
Yeah.
So be it.
We did some of that in the writing intensive class, which was the first year I've been teaching that. And but I thought we had a section, we didn't quite have a rubric, we sort of had a checklist for students to turn in with their assignment. But one category said, if I had more time to work on this assignment, what would I improve? And it was really interesting because a lot of people nailed it, I think, and then there were people who didn't. And so the feedback you give them is different, right? Like if people feel like this is what I need to improve, then you can kind of help them do that. And if they have no idea what they need to improve, your sort of comments back are a little bit different. But.
Well, sometimes they'll go right to the end and look at the grade, and that's all.
Right.
But that's where you can bring it back, when everyone's gotten their assignment back, and come back to class and say, how did it go? Here's what I saw. I saw these kinds of patterns. I saw these sorts of things. And just go back and gently have them look at the rubric again, because that's part of the assignment. And it's part of the learning experience, too. So that's another thing that just really helped me to use rubrics, is that if they become more conscious of their learning process, they become more thoughtful learners, too. And they may feel, this is a class that I've never done well in, I've never done well in this subject, but as they see that they can and how it breaks down, what the components are, and that perhaps they're doing very well in this aspect of it, not so well in that aspect, it's more like saying, you just need to improve in these areas. You're doing okay. Come on, just hang in there, keep going. It can be broken down and then synthesized and put back together. Okay, any other questions before we try a little exercise here? All right, let's go to this then. This is a rubric construction exercise, and if you brought an assignment that you wanted to work on, now's a good chance to get started on it. Even if you only do one level all the way across, you know, one dimension, and then fill out the levels across with the descriptors. And there's some other guides just behind that one, scoring guide rubric. Give you an example, another 3-level rubric, and then a 4-level rubric too. I think once we begin to see that these parts can be worked on over time, that you don't have to do the whole thing at once. You know, you can come up with your categories or your dimensions one day, come back to it, figure out how you want to describe those scale levels, and then fill in the descriptors. It's not such a daunting task. But thinking about sitting down and coming up with a whole 5-level rubric can be quite daunting. So take a shot at it. We've got a few minutes here, and see what you come up with. Maybe one of the most challenging things is coming up with the individual descriptors in each of those categories, and how you want to break that down. So feel free to work together and